Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into a really significant document from 1968. It's Pope Paul VI encyclical Humanae Vitae.
Right, often known as On the Regulation of Human Births.
Yeah.
And just for context, an encyclical is a major teaching letter from the Pope.
Exactly. And this one, Humanae Vitae, it isn't just theology. It really captures a moment. Society was changing incredibly fast back then. And these fundamental questions about life, marriage, family, they suddenly have this new urgency.
That's right. So our mission today is to unpack this source material. We want to understand the background, the context that led to it,
Idea what's going on.
and then look at the core arguments, the definitions it uses for marriage, for family life, and of course the specific guidelines, and interestingly, the warnings it laid out.
Warnings for individuals and society. It certainly caused a stir and still does.
It really does.
So we want to explore those new questions the church was wrestling with in 68 about transmitting life. And how did this document try to answer them in ways that, well, still echo today?
Let's dive in.
Okay, so setting the scene, the encyclical itself starts by saying, look, transmitting human life has always posed grave problems to the conscience of married persons. That's a direct quote.
Right. It acknowledges the historical weight.
But then it says recent societal changes brought up new questions the church couldn't just ignore. So what were these big shifts Paul VI was looking at?
Well, the document highlights a few key things. First off, demographic development. There were widespread fears, about population growth outstripping resources.
The population bomb idea was big then.
Exactly. And this caused real distress for families, for nations, and created this temptation, as the document puts it, for authorities to use radical measures.
Okay, so population pressure. What else?
Then there were changes in living conditions, just practical stuff, work, housing, the rising costs and demands of educating more children. It was becoming genuinely harder for many families to manage a large number of kids.
Makes sense. A practical reality.
Third, a definite shift in views on the role of women, her place in society. That was changing. And also a new, maybe deeper appreciation for conjugal love itself within marriage, the meaning of those intimate acts.
So a more personalist view emerging.
Kind of, reflecting more on the relationship aspect. And finally, maybe the most critical driver for the encyclical, man's incredible progress in dominating nature, science, technology.
Right.
The document says man was extending this domination to his own total being. Body, mind, social life, even crucially, the laws regulating the transmission of life itself. A sense of newfound power.
Wow. Okay, that paints a picture of a world really in flux. Given all that population fears, changing life, new ideas about women and love, this explosion of technical power, what were the specific ethical questions bubbling up?
The encyclical zeroes in on three big ones that emerged from all this. First, should the church maybe revise its ethical norms, especially if following the old rules seem to require, quote, heroic sacrifices? Was it time for an update, basically?
Christian practicality, almost.
In a way, yes. Second, this idea of the principle of totality. Could that mean that aiming for a, let's say, less abundant but more rationalized fecundity might make some kind of materially sterilizing intervention?
Okay.
Yeah.
So does procreation belong to the whole marriage, not just every single act?
Precisely. That was a major theological debate happening. Does the overall fruitfulness of the marriage fulfill the procreative aspect, allowing for interventions in specific acts?
Got it. And the third question?
Had modern man, with his increased sense of responsibility, reached a point where he should use his reason and his will to regulate birth, rather than relying on the biological rhythms of his organism?
So intellect over biology. Control versus nature.
That's the tension exactly. Should human reason take the driver's seat entirely?
Okay, those are profound questions indeed. How did Pope Paul VI personally approach tackling these, knowing the weight and complexity involved?
Well, the document states pretty clearly that these questions needed a new and deeper reflection on the moral teaching about marriage.
Going back to basics.
Sort of. Grounding it in what the church understands as natural law, those moral truths, knowable by reason, but crucially illuminated and enriched by divine revelation.
So reason and faith together.
Yes. And it asserts the authority of the church's magisterium, that's the teaching office, pope and bishops, saying it's competent to interpret even that natural moral law. Christ gave them that authority, the document argues.
Okay.
To help with this reflection, Paul VI confirmed and actually expanded a study commission Pope John XXIII had started back in '63.
Right, the famous commission.
Yes, and it was diverse experts from different fields, scientists, theologians, and significantly married couples, too. Their job was to gather info, opinions on these new questions.
So it's like broad input.
Exactly. But here's a really crucial point the encyclical makes. The Pope said the Commission's findings could not be considered by us as definitive.
Ah, why not?
Because, he states, certain criteria of solutions had emerged, which departed from the moral teaching on marriage, proposed with constant firmness by the teaching authority of the Church. Basically, some recommendations didn't align with tradition.
So the commission might have leaned one way, but he felt bound by previous teaching.
That's the implication. His final decision, he wrote, came after mature reflection and assiduous prayers by virtue of the mandate entrusted to us by Christ. It really underscores his sense of ultimate personal responsibility and authority in this.
Understood. So that brings us to the theological heart of the document, this integral vision of man it talks about. How does it define conjugal love within that vision? It seems foundational.
It absolutely is, and it's a very specific, rich definition. Love, it says, originates from God, who is love. Marriage is God's wise institution for realizing his design of love in humanity.
So divine origins.
Yes, and it's not just chance, not mere biology or instinct. It's a reciprocal personal gift of self. Husband and wife moving towards this deep communion of their being.
A total union.
And through that union, they collaborate with God in the generation and education of new lives. And for baptized Christians, it's elevated further. It becomes a sacramental sign of grace.
Okay. Does it break that down further? Characteristics?
It does. 4 key marks or characteristics. First, it's fully human, meaning body and spirit, senses and soul. It's an act of free will meant to last, creating one only heart and one only soul.
Human in the fullest sense.
Second, it's total. A unique kind of friendship where the couple generously share everything. No holding back, no selfish calculations.
All in.
Third, faithful and exclusive, until death. Meant to be a source of deep, lasting happiness.
Faithfulness as core.
And fourth, it's fecund,
Right.
fruitful. It's not just about the couple's communion, it's naturally oriented towards raising up new lives. Children are called the supreme gift of marriage.
Free, total, faithful, fruitful. That's a very integrated picture.
Exactly.
So alongside that definition of love, what about responsible parenthood? We hear that phrase a lot, but what does Humanae Vitae mean by it specifically?
Right. In the context of the encyclical, responsible parenthood involves using reason and will to govern instinct or passion. It's about deliberate choice, not just letting biology run its course.
Okay, so conscious decision-making.
Yes. And it says this responsibility can be exercised in 2 ways, either through a deliberate and generous decision to raise a numerous family,
Welcoming many children.
or, importantly, through a decision made for grave motives and with due respect for the moral law to avoid, for the time being, or even for an indeterminate period, a new birth.
So deciding not to conceive for serious reasons is also part of responsible parenthood.
Yes, provided it's done according to the moral law as the document defines it. It stresses this implies a more profound relationship to the objective moral order established by God. Meaning couples need to consider their duties to God, themselves, their family, society. They aren't, quote, free to proceed completely at will. Their actions should conform to the creative intention of God. It's about aligning human choices with perceived divine design.
Got it. So it's responsibility within a specific moral and theological framework.
Precisely.
And this framework, this understanding of love and responsibility, leads directly to the encyclical's most famous, and let's be honest, most controversial teaching. What's that core principle?
It is indeed the crux. The teaching is, each and every marriage act, colibet matrimony usus, must remain open to the transmission of life. Every single act.
Open to life. Okay? And the reasoning behind that.
It's based, the document argues, on the inseparable connection, willed by God and unable to be broken by man on his own initiative, between the 2 meanings of the conjugal act, the unitive meaning and the procreative meaning.
The 2 meanings, unity and procreation, inseparable.
That's the claim, that the intimate structure of the act itself unites the couple and makes them capable of generating new life. Safeguarding both aspects, it says, preserves true mutual love and directs it towards the high calling of parenthood.
So it's not just that some acts should be open to life, or that marriage overall should be, but that each act has this inherent dual meaning that shouldn't be deliberately separated.
That is precisely the core argument, that the structure itself holds both meanings intrinsically linked.
Okay, that clarifies the principle. So, based on that inseparable connection, what specific actions does the document rule out as illicit ways to regulate birth?
It's very explicit here. First, absolutely excluded is any direct interruption of the generative process already begun. And it specifically names directly willed and procured abortion, even if for therapeutic reasons.
A clear line on abortion.
Unequivocal. Second, equally to be excluded is direct sterilization, permanent or temporary, for either the man or the woman.
Sterilization is out too.
Yes. And third, also excluded, is every action which, either in anticipation of the conjugal act or in its accomplishment or in the development of its natural consequences, proposes, whether as an end or as a means, to render procreation impossible.
That sounds like it covers most forms of contraception.
It's generally understood to cover barrier methods, hormonal contraception, anything that deliberately prevents conception from occurring in relation to the marital act.
And the document anticipates arguments like it's the lesser evil.
It does. It explicitly rejects justifying these actions by saying they're a lesser evil or that they're part of a larger whole with other fertile acts. It invokes the principle, quote, "It is not licit, even for the gravest reasons, to do evil so that good may follow therefrom."
A very firm stance.
Very.
So if abortion, sterilization, and contraception are excluded, what is considered permissible for regulating births according to Humanae Vitae? What options remain for couples needing to space births?
The encyclical outlines two licit scenarios. First, using therapeutic means. If medical treatment is truly necessary to cure diseases, it's okay, even if it unintentionally results in infertility. The key is that the infertility isn't directly willed as the purpose of the treatment.
So treating an underlying illness is fine, even with side effects on fertility.
Correct. The intention matters. Second, and this is the significant one, is recourse to natural rhythms. If there are serious motives to space out births, physical, psychological, external conditions, the document says it's illicit to take into account the natural rhythms imminent in the generative functions. Meaning timing intercourse for naturally infertile periods, natural family planning, or NFP.
And how does it distinguish that from artificial methods?
It argues that NFP is using a legitimate use of a natural disposition, working with the body's cycles, whereas artificial contraception involves an impeding or obstructing of the natural processes of generation. That's the key distinction it draws.
Working with versus working against nature, in its view.
Essentially, yes.
Now, what's fascinating, too, is that the document didn't just say no to certain things. It also predicted some negative consequences if artificial birth control became widely accepted. What were those warnings?
Yes, it laid out several potential societal outcomes it feared. One was that it would open a wide and easy road towards conjugal infidelity, easier separation of sex from commitment and consequence.
A weakening of marital bonds.
And related to that, a general lowering of moral standards, particularly among the young, perhaps.
Okay.
A concern about loss of respect for women. It warned that men, getting used to contraception, might finally lose respect for the woman and start seeing her as a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment rather than a partner.
It's a significant concern about objectification.
And then there was a concern about government power, that contraception would place a dangerous weapon in the hands of those public authorities who take no heed of moral exigencies.
How so?
The fear was that governments might promote or even impose contraception on people, interfering in the most private area of life. That people, trying to avoid difficulties, might end up giving authorities control over the most personal and most reserved sector of conjugal intimacy.
A warning about state overreaching to the family.
Yes. It strongly reiterates that there are insurmountable limits to human dominion, even over one's own body and its functions.
It's striking, as you said, it's not just a moral ruling, but a kind of social prophecy, too. It sees these interventions as having broad, potentially damaging ripple effects.
Definitely. It connects the personal choices to the health of the society.
So given these strong teachings and warnings, the document itself must have known it would be tough. It even says its teaching will perhaps not be easily received by all. How did it address that challenge? How did it offer support?
It approaches it with a mix of firmness and pastoral concern. It acknowledges the church will be a sign of contradiction on this.
Standing against the tide.
Right. But it insists it must proclaim with humble firmness the entire moral law, because it sees itself as the guardian and interpreter, not the author of that law.
A duty to the truth as it sees it.
Exactly. And it argues that defending these conjugal morals actually helps build a truly human civilization by upholding the dignity of husband and wife.
Okay, but what about the difficulty? The heroic sacrifices mentioned earlier.
It acknowledges the honest practice of regulation of birth demands, serious engagement, and much effort. It doesn't downplay the difficulty, but it emphasizes needing the help of God.
Mm.
And it frames the discipline positively, saying it ennobles man, brings spiritual values, peace to families, combats selfishness, deepens responsibility.
So difficult, yes, but ultimately rewarding and humanizing.
That's the vision it presents, a path to deeper love and flourishing, even through sacrifice.
That's the general encouragement. But did it give specific instructions or calls to action for different groups in society and the church?
Oh, yes, very specific calls to educators and public authorities. It urged creating an atmosphere favorable to education and chastity, fighting things like pornography and promoting family-friendly policies and education respectful of moral law and citizens' liberty.
A call for a supportive social environment.
Definitely. For men of science, it encouraged more research to advance the welfare of marriage and the family, specifically asking them to help explain more thoroughly the various conditions favoring a proper regulation of births, and provide a sufficiently secure basis for NFP based on observing natural rhythms.
So, better science for NFP.
Yes, improve the methods. For Christian married couples, a call to live out their vocation with faith and hope, using prayer and sacraments like the Eucharist and penance for strength, and importantly, to become apostles and guides to other married couples. Mutual support.
Community is key.
Absolutely. For physicians and medical personnel, a call to uphold their Christian vocation, promote solutions aligned with faith and right reason, get educated on these matters, and offer wise counsel.
Ethical guidance from doctors.
Right. For priests, the task of explaining the teaching without ambiguity, setting an example of obedience, but also showing mercy and guiding couples through difficulties, teaching prayer and reliance on sacraments.
Clarity and compassion from the clergy.
That's the balance it asks for. And finally, for bishops, a strong call to work ardently for the safeguarding and the holiness of marriage, calling it one of their most urgent responsibilities, needing concerted pastoral action across the board.
A comprehensive set of marching orders, really.
It really touches all parts of the church and society.
So, we've taken a pretty deep dive here into Humanae Vitae. We've looked at the context, those challenging questions of the late 60s, and the very detailed, integrated response the encyclical offered, grounded in its specific view of humanity, marriage, and God's law.
It's a document that, it's over 50 years old now, but it lays out a perspective on life and family that's still profoundly influential for, well, a huge number of people globally. And it's important to see it not just as a list of don'ts, but as presenting a positive, though demanding, vision for human flourishing, promising deeper peace and fulfillment within family life through specific choices.
What really stands out to you looking back at it now?
I think it's the clarity of the framework it presents. Right or wrong, agree or disagree, it lays out a coherent, integrated vision. It's a call to a very profound sense of responsibility, not just about when or if to have children, but about the very nature of love and commitment itself.
An integrated vision, as you say. Well, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. The document, as we discussed, predicted some specific societal consequences if its teachings on contraception were widely rejected. Think about those predictions, particularly around respect for women and the potential for government overreach into family life. How do those predictions from 1968 seem to align or maybe diverge from the realities you observe in the world today? Something to consider.